Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do my December reading wrap-up. I know I'm a little late. We're already into January of 2021. But, with the holidays, I just did not have a chance to get this in before the end of the year. So, better late than never. I hope you have enjoyed the new year so far and that things are going well. At the time I'm filming this, the runoff in Georgia is happening. So, it's also a sad time of year because this weekend we already took the lights outside the house down after the holidays, and this weekend we are going to be taking down the tree and all the other Christmas stuff, and it's stuff that makes me happy. So I'm enjoying it while I can. Hope you are, and hope you're enjoying. Like I said, I hope you're enjoying the beginning of 2021 so far. December was actually a really great reading month. I finished 8 books and DNF'ed 1, so we have a lot to talk about, lots to cover. It was a really good reading year for me. I can't wait to do my official wrap up for 2020, but I wanted to make sure I did December individually because there are some things that I read in this month that will not feature in my best of. By the way, you can see we have a little bird feeder thing with little crystals on it outside, and it's doing a little disco ball thing just because the sun loves to torment me at this time of year. It is what it is. Anyway, some of these will not be showing up on my best of list. I still haven't decided if I'm going to be doing a worst list. So those will be coming, but some of these will. I wanted to make sure I gave some of these a shout out. So, and still to come, I have an announcement about my reading goal for 2021. That's to come too, so I'll stay tuned for all of that. Right now, let's just wrap up the month of December. The first book that I finished in the month of December is Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbli Weiden. I actually listened to this on audio, although I do have a physical copy of the book. This is a mystery thriller, leans more into the thriller than the mystery part. What I like about this is that it avoids all of the cliches and pitfalls that really irritate me about the mystery thriller genre in recent years. It does not rely on twists. It does not rely on gimmicks and tricks. It's not actively trying to trick you. There's no unreliable narrator. Nothing like that. Instead, it's just a deep dive into life on a modern day reservation and how indigenous lives in this country all too often slip through the cracks. It's about people who have lived their whole lives without being seen, fighting to keep bad forces, in this case drug dealers, out of their land and out of their community. And while it isn't a perfect book, I found it engaging, funny, and surprisingly poignant. I think in particular, the part that has been most resonant to me is that at one point, someone shows up on the reservation and is doing sort of like a food demo of indigenous food, and he talks about how he kind of demeans fry bread. He's like, that's not our native food, that's not our culture. And of course the people on the reservation are kind of laughing at him like, what is this guy talking about? What does he know about indigenous culture? And it's kind of like a joke about people who assume they know what goes on reservations, but then over time, as this character who had initially been seen to be kind of comical in a way and a little bit like he didn't know what he was talking about, turns out to be right, because indigenous food was not fry bread. Fry bread is something that was created when indigenous people were forced onto reservations and were only given things like flour and basically commodity food. It's what they did with what they had. It has become a cultural thing, but it is not part of their heritage. So I thought that was really interesting, and how it had that kind of layered approach where on the one hand, this person doesn't really understand the way they live, but on the other hand, there was a truth to it where they had lost a little bit of their heritage and had to try to reconnect, the idea of reconnecting to your heritage. And I thought that was really interesting. By the way, the person who came in was not a white person trying to tell them about native food. He was another native person but he had lived in, I think, LA. So he still seemed like an outsider to them. But I thought there were things like that were very interesting about this book. So that's Winter Counts by David Heska Wanbli Weiden. The next book that I finished in the month of December was The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. If you follow along, you know you've heard me gush about this book. I really loved this. It first came onto my radar when it was longlisted for the National Book Award, and then it was shortlisted for it. It did not win. Do not sleep on this book. I have been so glad that so many people have commented back to me to say that they are picking this book up or that they have read it and also loved it. I really hope more people discover this book. I just love it. Don't sleep on it. This is a debut story collection about Southern Black women struggling to find agency in spite of the crushing expectations and roles that society, religion, and family have placed on them. It's thoughtful, intelligent, emotional, and profound. It's also really unapologetic about making these characters well-rounded women with sexual lives and desires, which is something that feels refreshing. A lot of the time, it feels like non-Caucasian characters have to be treated with kid gloves, and they aren't allowed to be complicated or have any of these layers. So it's really refreshing to read a book where they are able to grapple with all of those things. And it's really nice that the characters are flawed and fascinating in realistic and engaging and empathetic ways. And I'm just so happy again that more people are discovering this book. It's wonderful. So it's been a while since I have read a lot of short stories. I used to read a whole bunch of them and I've kind of gotten away with it. Now it seems like I read like maybe one or two a year. And this really reignited my passion for short stories, and I want to try to seek some more out in 2021. And I'm very eager to see what Deesha Philyaw does next. The next book I finished in December was Love by Toni Morrison. This was a buddy read with Britta Bowler. Now, Toni Morrison's writing is unparalleled, and Love is no exception to that. But the story here, to me, feels a little bit muddy. Like I said, this was a buddy read with Britta Bowler, and at one point, when I was leaving her a message, I started to comment about how I couldn't wait for all of the separate plot threads to start forming a narrative now that we were really introduced to all of these people. And then I realized that we were more than halfway through the book at that point. So the likelihood of them coming together and forming a narrative was kind of unlikely. I mean, they do, but it takes a while and they seem really disparate. And even at the end, I don't feel like all of them come together all that well. I think if you pared this book down and removed some of the elements, it could be much stronger. I think if you focused this book on the three primary characters in it, Christine, Heed, and Vida, and removed like a lot of the ghost elements from it, you'd have a much stronger narrative. So if you're unfamiliar, Love is a story about, it's called Love, but it's really about betrayal, which is what Toni Morrison outlines in her foreword. And there's basically these three women are kind of fighting over the legacy of the man in their life. One of them is his daughter, one of them is his granddaughter, one of them is his wife, and Vida is someone who comes into the house having had a sort of troubled life, and she gets stuck between Christine and Heed in their fight over the legacy. Christine and Heed are both kind of actively warring against each other for control of the house and his inheritance, basically. And I feel like if you really focused on that part of the story, took the ghost elements out, and just focused on that, it would be much, much stronger. I still love Toni Morrison, and I would still love to read more by her, but this is the first one of hers that I don't really remember Home very well, but I feel like it might be in the same boat as this. I liked it. I didn't, no pun intended. As I started talking, I realized, I'm walking into a pun. I liked it. I didn't love it. Sorry. The next book I finished in the month of December was something I listened to on audio. It's Overground Railroad by Candacy Taylor. And again, if you follow along, you've heard me gush about it. I really loved this book. I feel like I learned so much from Overground Railroad in the best possible way. Basically, it uses the Green Book, which was created to help African Americans travel the country safely during the first half of the 20th century. It uses that to address so many issues in American life: racism, segregation, colorism, systemic racism, redlining, police violence, and more. And perhaps the smartest thing that an Overground Railroad does, however, is repeatedly show you why all of those matters are still urgent today. It does occasionally feel like it's throwing too much information at you. It's a really dense book in terms of information, but it also feels absolutely essential. And I feel like I got so much out of the experience of reading it. And again, this basically, because it also talks about in the early 1900s, when people started having leisure time particularly after World War II, because the Green Book actually started in the 1930s, but particularly after World War II, people started having leisure time. And planes hadn't really taken off. There wasn't really commercial air travel to the extent that we know it today. So when people wanted to travel the country, they got in their cars, but this was not an option that was really open to African American citizens. And because they couldn't travel the country safely, there was no guarantee that they were going to be served at restaurants or be able to gas up their cars, that they would find lodging to stay at, or anything like that. So Overground Railroad talks about that, and then also talks about how we still experience a lot of those same problems today. I definitely recommend it. It was wonderful. I listened to the audio. I really want to get a copy of the book, even if it comes out in paperback, if I wait for that, because it looks like a beautiful edition, has a lot of supplemental material, some really cool photographs. So I am kind of waiting and keeping an eye out for that. But the audio was really good as well. Next was the DNF, which was An Extraordinary Union by Alyssa Cole. Like I said, this was the DNF for me. I had wanted to try to get a little bit more experience in the romance genre outside of the LGBTQ plus arena. I've read romance novels that have gay protagonists. But unfortunately, this one kind of failed for me. So set during the Civil War, it follows a black female spy who goes into the South to pose as a slave, and there's a white male spy that she has to work with. And of course, they meet and sparks immediately fly. They immediately catch each other's eye. But what didn't work for me was that even though the book actively uses the power imbalance between them to show the precariousness of her situation in particular, and how no matter how smart she is, no matter how good at her job she doesn't have power and agency according to society at large. The book actively works that into it. However, that very imbalance also makes how relentlessly he pursues her feel really reckless, really inappropriate, and just icky. I mean, so they first meet, and then I think it's in their second meeting, while they're hiding from people who stumble on the area where they're having a conversation, it's a little rapey. And I didn't like that. I found it a little rapey. I feel like he was using the situation, not necessarily his authority over her, to kind of force himself on her. And I didn't really like that. So it was a DNF for me. I am hoping to do a little bit more with romance outside of the LGBTQ spectrum. In 2021, I have a book by Stacey Abrams, who writes romance novels under the name Selena Montgomery. So hopefully that will be a little bit more successful for me. Moving along, though, the next book that I finished in December was Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. Finally, if you follow along, you know I had started this possibly even in October, maybe even late September. And then in the lead up to the election, I was really having a hard time reading. And I ended up putting it to the side so I could focus on some other books, get them done, and then I circled back to Burnt Sugar in December. And once I picked it back up, I kind of flew through it. So what did I think of Burnt Sugar? Well, this book is poison that you really can't help but swallow. I loved it. It's an examination of a toxic relationship between a mother and a daughter that is entering its final stages of existence. So the daughter, Antara, believes that her mother, Tara, and their names are deliberately opposed to each other. So Antara believes that her mother, Tara, is showing signs of dementia, which forces Antara to begin caring for a mother that she feels never really cared for her. So she has a lot of feelings of resentment and conflicting attitudes about this. She doesn't know if she should care or not, or if she should just leave it alone. That is really deepened by the fact that caring for her mother starts to put strain on her marriage and her own relationships and her own life. So it just continues complicating the situation. And because Antara feels obliged to make sure that her mother is okay. Playing with memory and perception versus reality, Burnt Sugar crafts a really unusual and discomforting narrative about parenthood and generational trauma. It's simultaneously beautiful and ugly, thoughtful and angry. It is definitely difficult reading during a particularly difficult time in the world, but I highly recommend it. I just thought this book did a lot of really smart things. If I hadn't been such a fan of Shuggie Bain, this is probably the book I would have liked to see win the Booker Prize, but I'm a really big fan of Shuggie Bain. So it's an interesting counterpoint to Shuggie Bain. And if you follow along, you know I had been reading them at the same time, and then I Shuggy Bane was a buddy read, so I prioritized that and put this one to the side. But they are interesting counterpoints to each other. If you would ever, it's a lot, since both of them deal with difficult parent-child relationships. But if you are so inclined, it is really interesting to do them either back to back or kind of simultaneously. The next book I finished in December is The Vanishing Half by Brit, Bennett. And again, if you follow along, you know I had actually started the audio of this earlier in the year, didn't finish it in time. It got returned to the library, and it took a while for me to get the audio back. This one I completely restarted in December because it had been a while. And I thought that was a really good thing to do, because I really got so much more out of it by getting the whole story on this one and not trying to pick up threads from 5 months earlier. I think the number of ways that this book plays with the concept of identity is a little bit astonishing, even more so since it manages to provoke interesting conversations about its various layers. It mostly deals with identity as something fluid, like a tool for reinvention, but it also deals with identity as a form of activation, which I think is really interesting. It also talks about the ways identity can be used against you. And it does this by layering the ways that different roles, be they race or gender, it even features a transgender character, ways in which your role can be used to put you into a specific place. Could be a geographic place, it could be your economic place, any number of things. Again, this book works on multiple levels. In telling the story of two light-skinned twin sisters and the different paths they take, one of them passes as white, the other one ends up living back in the community where they were raised. And Bennett manages to create a deceptively simple story that has so much roiling under the surface, and I really enjoyed it. I definitely see why this ended up on a lot of year-end best lists. I think this is a great book club book, and I really enjoyed it a lot. All right, we have 2 books to go that I read in the month of December. Next is something that I actually read an ebook of it. So I spent most of December getting lost in holiday romance movies and making that my happy place. So since I was in that frame of mind, my husband had he's been following a romance series by Lucy Lennox, and he recommended one of the books to me. So I read Wild Love by Lucy Lennox. And again, since the kind of holiday romance movies were my refuge at the end of 2020, it's probably no surprise that I ended up seeking additional refuge in a gay romance novel, and I loved it for that. It was pretty perfect for it. It's not a holiday romance, but it's still kind of helped a lot with my mental well-being at the end of a difficult year. So again, this is part of a series which follows a bunch of brothers and cousins who take turns finding romance, overseen by their grandfather and his husband, and which is kind of an interesting twist. And for me, it was particularly interesting because even though it's grandparents, not a father, I have a gay father, so it's kind of interesting to see that reflected in any kind of fiction. So this book goes back and tells the story of how their grandfather, Doc, met his future husband in Vietnam, where they forged a really deep friendship. Back in the US, they continued to be friends despite Doc's heterosexual marriage, and he had kids, and the expectations of the community that they lived in. Eventually, they do find their way to each other. Anyway, it's a surprisingly sweet, resonant story about acceptance and living in the closet, and it is kind of tarnished by a really awful ending, to be honest. Basically, I feel like if you cut off the last 2 chapters of the book, it would be great. But so what happens is, in the last 2 chapters, Lucy Lennox basically gives into fan service by trying to bring every single member of the Wilde family and all the people who are in the series together with all of the members of her other gay romance series, the Marion series, where there's another family with a lot of gay brothers. So she tries to put all of them in the same location, give every single one of them a moment, and it's so cheesy, and it really changes the tone. What was really sweet and kind of low-key becomes really over-the-top, tacky, lots of sex jokes, which is fine, but it just was like, the tone is like whiplash different from the rest of the book. And it felt like fan service. And as somebody who hasn't read any of the other books in this series, I have read one of the Marion books. It felt silly and wrong. And it's like, I wanted a more heartfelt ending, that would fit with the rest of the book, and that's not what I got. So I feel like this book deserved a lot better in a climax. Pun kind of intended there. But I did enjoy it, and I would actually be curious to go and read some more of these books. So there you go. And then the last book that I finished in the month of December, last book I finished in 2020, was Gachar Gochar by Vivek Shanbhag. So like I said, this was the last book that I finished in 2020. It was not the last book that I started. I had 2 stragglers that carried into 2021. I'm not one of those people who feels like you need to finish everything and start fresh with something brand new in 2021. So 2 books carried over. I will be talking about them soon. So this is a novella. It is translated by Srinath Perur, I believe. Let me find out. Yes, translated by Srinath Perur. This is a novella that really hums and crackles. It settles you into the world of a family who's undergone a really drastic change in fortune for the better. And they are struggling to adapt to their new reality. New allegiances and power dynamics have emerged and must continue to be forged and maintained. And old values begin to fade away. As captivating as I found all of this, however, I confess I really wanted more. So ultimately, the book's short length kind of worked against it for me. I would have happily seen all of these details fleshed out more. Still, it was a great cap to a very compelling reading year. I would recommend it. It has a lot of interesting things to say. The characters, the writing is just beautiful. It immediately, in the first pages, it talks about one of the characters is sitting in a cafe, and his observations of cafe life. And it's very different from the rest of the book, which kind of flashes back, but it's the point just being that the writing is really captivating, and I kind of wanted more of a lot of the bits that are in this really only small book. So that is everything that I read in the month of December and the one DNF. I would love to hear how your December went, how your 2020 has gotten started, what you've been loving, what you've been hating. If you're excited about 2021, I'm kind of leery. I don't want to get excited because, I thought 2019 was a rough year and was really looking forward to 2020. And then in hindsight, I probably should have known things were wrong when in the first few days of 2020, the Pope slapped a lady. That probably should have been a sign. But anyway, so I'm kind of hesitant to get excited about 2021, but I'm always hopeful. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That's my slogan for the day, I guess. I'll put "it is what it is" to the side for now. But like I said, I would love to hear what you have going on in your reading life. And otherwise, right now, leave it in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time. And I will be back. Again, stay tuned for my best of 2020, potentially my worst of 2020. And I'll tell you what I've decided to do with my 2021 reading goal. I'm excited about it. Don't know if you'll be, but I'm excited. So anyway, I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.